Hello and welcome to UC Today. My name is David Dungay. Today we have a special session. I'm joined by Dave Michels of Talking Points. Welcome to the show, Dave. How are you?
Good, thank you. Great to be here.
Fantastic. So today we're going to be talking about some of the highlights from your February special report, and there's
The
so much
insider
in there,
report.
Dave.
The insider report. This is
Insider
for
report.
insiders only.
So, I mean, February was a huge month. There's so much in there. We're not going to be able to touch on it all, but we're going to pick out a few key points. I've clearly been at a lot of events recently as well. We'll pick out some of those, and I think we'll probably end with a bit of a touch on the Mitel Chapter 11 situation as
That's a
well.
March report, but yeah, we can talk
Yeah.
about that. Sure.
So, well, let's start then, Dave. Let's start with MDEP. That was the talk of the town at an event recently, ISE, that we were both at. We're just starting to see some of those products being released. Jabra was the latest one I saw. What's the latest with MDEP? Why is this important? And I think there's a feeling that you feel like we're underplaying MDEP potentially as an industry and its importance. What's your take?
Well, I think MDEP is incredibly important, and I think that the industry is a little confused by it. It was first announced at Enterprise Connect. I think it's the 2023 keynote. Ilya announced it on stage at the Enterprise Connect and mentioned it's coming. A lot of the partners weren't very happy about this, and I can explain that. But nobody expected it to take this long. It's taken a long time, and it's been a slow grind. When's MDEP coming? And it's always like it's almost here for just long, long time. So yes, at ISE in Barcelona, which is the first week of February, we saw significant progress. Several products, and Jabra was the first to come out. These are all in the Microsoft Teams Room category, and several products. I think Microsoft announced. I think it's 10, maybe it's 11 partners. And so, it's finally here, it's come. And what MDEP is it's Microsoft's version of Android. So a lot of meeting room systems were moving from Windows to Android. So a complete Microsoft meeting room solution has Android pieces in there. And there's kind of a conflict at Microsoft. One, it's not all Microsoft. And two, there's a potential security concern because Android's had some issues. Microsoft's not controlling that. So they're putting their name on the meeting room, and they can't control this aspect of it and if it's safe or secure. So Microsoft said we have to fix this with MDEP, and so it's their version of Android, and it's controlled, and they're managing the security and updates, all that stuff. Should be the end of the story. And it kind of is for a lot of people. I think what's missing here is that MDEP is not a Microsoft Teams solution. It is an operating system. It is an operating system and in the same division out of Microsoft as Windows, and it has no tie to Teams whatsoever. This is a mobile operating system. And so if you look at what Microsoft did with Edge, they had a terrible situation with the browsers. Everybody was hating IE. They had a browser war, there's incompatibilities. Chrome was winning market share and wasn't sure what Microsoft was going to do. So they did something very clever. They took the free and open source parts of Chrome or Chromium, and they built a new browser with it called Edge, and they made it proprietary. They added all kinds of stuff to it that Chrome does for Google, but they do it for Microsoft. And so your user identity, your bookmarks, your syncing, and all that stuff. And they built up the Edge browser, and they did it with basically open source technology that they embedded in their product. Well, Android is also an open source technology. It's an open source operating system. And a lot of companies have their own version of Android. Every cell phone maker has its own version of Android, every cell phone maker but Apple. And all these different MTRs, for example, had their own versions of Android, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So why doesn't Microsoft have its own version of Android? So that's what MDEP is. Now, if they have that, and they do, and they have a way of securing it, they have a way of updating it, they have a way of managing it, and they have vendors in the ecosystem, which they already have with MTR. What else could they do with it? So they could do anything with this. And if you think about it, there's a lot more Android systems out there than there are PCs out there. A lot more mobile devices out there. So suddenly, I'm going to say overnight, but it took 3 years, but suddenly Microsoft has a mobile operating system. And I believe they're going to have, we're going to see a lot of activity around that. And I don't rule out a smartphone. Microsoft obviously missed mobile to a large degree, But now they have their own Android. And it wouldn't be surprising to me that they would come. If you have a Google Android phone, you have to have a Google user ID. You have to have Google services. You have to have a Google Marketplace. Microsoft could do all that stuff like they did with Chrome in the browser. They have the pieces there. So they're starting with MTR. Why not? There's already an Android ecosystem. It's already Microsoft. It's already got a security issue. So that's where you're starting. But that's not where MDEP is ending. That's not the story. The story is Microsoft has a mobile operating system.
Wow. So I mean, Microsoft, we did see a Windows phone. I can't remember how many years ago. I did see a few of those around at the time. What's going to make it different then? If we go down the smartphone route, what are these elements here around Edge, the operating system, the meetings? What's going to make the difference for this time round to be different? I guess.
Well, again, you're focusing on meeting room. You're looking at Edge, but you're looking at that meeting experience. But from a mobile operating perspective, everyone has a mobile device. Not everyone has a PC. So every one of Microsoft's customers has to have an Apple ID or an Android ID, has to go to their stores, has to pay 30% of their profits to get their apps, has to do all that stuff. Microsoft's missing out on all that stuff. Google has what they call the Play Store. Why can't Microsoft have the work store, right? Enterprise, so you've got your own credentials, you get your own business apps, you do everything from Microsoft, and you've already got your Office 365, you go get your other apps. So Microsoft has not announced an app store yet for MDEP, but I like to think it's coming. Now, I've got no official guidance from Microsoft on this, but it's an operating system that is capable of doing all these things. It's what we expect from operating systems. We only have two choices right now. We really only have Apple and Android. But if you think about it, rest of the world, because the way the political boundaries and stuff like that, China is doing great without the Play Store, and they had the Apple modify their app store. But there's room for another ecosystem in here, and I believe that Microsoft has all the pieces necessary now to make this happen. Now, Microsoft plays slow. So you start off with MDEP, you start off with meeting rooms. Like I said, you've already got 10 vendors, hardware vendors working with us, and they're going to get some experience. They're learning how to manage the vendors. They're learning how to deal with Android. But this operating system is not tied to Teams. That's the important thing. This operating system is a part of Microsoft's operating system group.
Wow. Well, I'd just like to. That's a very big call, Dave. So we're just going to mark that. We are recording on the 7th of March, 2025. Dave Michels says that maybe a Microsoft smartphone coming. I think we deserve to mark that date and time right now. So, that's big news. Let's go on to the next one. I don't know if it's going to be quite as impactful as that, but Alianza, obviously they're sort of the core sort of driver behind service providers right now. We saw the Metaswitch acquisition. This was announced quite a while ago, but it's just closed in the last week or so.
It just closed. Yeah, it just closed.
Yeah.
I was at Mobile World Congress. I saw the Alianza team the date they closed it. The deal was announced in December. And during that period, Talking Points published for its subscribers a detailed research note on the Alianza experience or Alianza acquisition. So this is something that is, again, kind of below the radar because Alianza is not a name that most comms professionals are familiar with. It's every one of their customers rebrands the solutions. So like Lumen, for example, has Alianza in powering their solutions, but Lumen rebrands it as their own communication solutions. So not an enterprise brand, Alianza. So if you look at the original, VoIP service provider space, we saw lots of M&A and lots of activity in the 90s. And that kind of settled with three major vendors. It was Metaswitch, BroadSoft, and Genban or Ribbon. Genban as rebranded as Ribbon. And those are the three major players, and they power almost every major service provider out there with dial tone. That space kind of got ignored for the last couple decades. We saw over-the-top kind of take over. Teams exploded, Zooms exploded, WebEx has been active, and everybody's been. These are global brands, and how can a local service provider compete with Microsoft Teams from a branding perspective? It's impossible, and so. and so we saw a pretty big shift toward the over-the-top players, but the service providers are still providing most of the dial tone out there, and that market has been kind of dull. There's just not been a lot of innovation. Cisco Cisco acquired BroadSoft, didn't do a lot into the BroadWorks side of the business. They instead developed everything onto WebEx calling and the WebEx experience. Metaswitch got acquired by Microsoft. Microsoft didn't do much with Metaswitch, focused on some other efforts and et cetera. And Ribbon's a very diversified company and just kind of ignored that base as well. So the base is alive and well. Customers are still buying and upgrading their systems, but it's just not that interesting. There's not much sizzle. So along comes Alianza, and they acquired Metaswitch from Microsoft. Now this is really interesting. What's going on here? And so Alianza's model is a pure cloud model, and Metaswitch's model is a perpetual license model where you cut the service providers buy it once and hopefully just keep on making money on it over and over and over. So there's a lot of question, is Alianza going to kill that old business model and force upgrades? That was a lot of speculation around Cisco doing the same with BroadSoft. That never happened. What's going on in this space? Well, there's one other, park that for just a moment. The other thing I want to talk about is that shift I said that went toward over the top, I think is going to start shifting back towards service providers. And there's a bunch of reasons why it's going to shift back towards service providers. Now, these are slow, gradual shifts. So nothing's going to happen overnight. But for one, it's become mature. And service providers excel in mature technology. When you buy from service providers, you buy things like dial tone or voicemail. You don't buy brands. They're not good at brands. I mentioned that earlier. And so now that Microsoft and Cisco and RingCentral and all these guys are slowing down on their global branding, and Zoom, they're slowing down their global branding. They're focusing on AI and stuff like that. That we are getting back to just dial tone, and so that's going to favor the service providers. We also seeing a lot of global tension around where your technology comes from. We're seeing sovereignty issues. We're seeing a lot of companies don't want to deal with American companies. They don't want their data in America. We're seeing that vice versa. I mean, America is pushing out TikTok, and so again, service providers tend to be local. Yes, so pushback against U.S. firm. Oh, another issue is antitrust. The European Union raised issues with Microsoft Teams being, antitrust issues, and Microsoft does not like antitrust conversations. And so I think we're going to see the Teams environment get quieter. I think the whole shift is just going to start gradually shifting and favoring service providers. So Alianza's timing is pretty good. Metaswitch has still got a very large base. They have all the major service providers as customers. And so the question is now, what do they do with that? And I think what we're going to see emerge here is another theme that we're starting to see across the space with hybrid communications. I think that a lot of the AI, a lot of that interest in modern communications requires some cloud components, but doesn't necessarily require everything to be cloud. And so I think Alianza is going to be looking to farm that base to get them up to some more advanced types of services. I think it's going to be really interesting too.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think also looking at where Microsoft is pointing its dev teams right now, it's all at Copilot, not at Microsoft Teams. So that's going to be, and it's an interesting time. And I think you're right; it's an opportunity for Alianza and those other guys you mentioned as well to kind of capitalize. One thing within that, which is kind of related, I did want to talk about. You mentioned the perpetual licenses on Metaswitch. Also on Broadworks as well. So we saw Cisco making the decision to end those perpetual licenses. It was going to be this year. They've actually rolled that back now for another 5 years. So service providers are going to have a bit more time to kind of sort themselves out. But I'm trying to think around the industry. It's like, is this obviously this is a good thing for service providers? They've got a bit more time. But is this a bad thing for the industry as a whole? We do have the likes of Zoom, Teams sitting there with their AI stories. They're very much sort of ready to go platforms. What does this mean for service providers? What's your take?
It's not just service providers. It's you and me as individuals too. every business wants to be a subscription-based business, and every customer just wants to just buy it. I just want to buy it and own it, and so we're seeing that clearly. The business model of dial tone for the service providers was created with buy it once, and you can keep on reselling it as your customers churn. You just resell it, reuse the license, and that model is not that profitable for the service providers, for the software developers. And so companies like Cisco, they want recurring money to come in, and so they can keep on improving the product and developing the product. And it's hard to keep on doing that when the product has no recurring revenue. So everybody wants to move away from that. It's hard to do. And most service providers in the world are still on a perpetual license. And so even if Cisco just continues selling perpetual licenses, they could keep running that software forever. And so we're seeing that in Prem too. We're seeing that in the premises-based world with the PBX model. But there's a push toward that recurring model, and there's a push back from the customers. And it's going to be really, really hard. It's not just a matter of how you source it and purchase it. It's the way you run your business, right? So if you're a service provider and you bought this license once, your compensation model, so your sales team is based around that. Your compensation, your whole operational cost, everything is built around you paid for it once and you don't have to pay for it again. And so to just be told now you have to pay, a small fraction every month is very, very disruptive and very difficult for a lot of these service providers. Now, obviously, there's a lot of benefit to it for everybody else, including the service provider, because the software upgrades and ongoing innovation. It's a complex area, and there's no right answer. We know that if you want a lot of innovation, you're going to have to go to that subscription-based model because that's the only way that you can fund it. And
has this been a bit of a handbrake on the industry then in terms of innovation, do you think?
Well, the thing is, dial tone has always been a bit of a handbrake in terms of enterprise communications. You think about all the stuff going on in AI. Meetings have changed dramatically. The way the cameras work, the sound quality, what's going on in the contact center. There's just so much automation going on. But voice is pretty much largely the same, and it's not changing that much. And where it is changing, it's changing very gradually. So I think there is some opportunity for voice to be stimulated by AI type of services. My Google phone, I have a Pixel Android phone. I'm surprised how much AI they actually have in the calling experience. One of my favorite features is it has virtual hold. It detects when I'm on hold with here's the music and offers to just, put the phone down and we'll ring it when they answer. It's like, that's a basic real feature that is built into the handset that makes a lot of sense to me. So there's opportunities for some AI in calling, but most of calling hasn't gotten a lot of attention.
Yeah. Okay. Well, sticking with the Cisco theme, we've obviously both been at a lot of events recently. ISE, there was Cisco Live in the middle of there, and obviously more recently MWC. What are you picking up from a Cisco point of view? Obviously, that was a big part of your newsletter, or the insider report, I should say. What are you picking up from Cisco and the WebEx platform now? They've had a bit of a turnaround, it feels, in the last couple of years. I
really feel like it's coming to fruition. I wrote about that in the insider because it wasn't long ago that I was getting a lot of questions about how does Cisco get out of the WebEx hole they dug themselves into. They sell the business off, do they spin it off, all that stuff. But right now, Cisco is just doing great, and WebEx is doing great, and it's been building for a while. And so Jeetu Patel came in, I think it was 5 years ago. Javed Khan, who just recently left, they've done so much work at changing the direction of Cisco. And I was thinking about it at Cisco Live because they were taking some bows and they were talking about all these things they've accomplished. But their stock is at a 30-year high right now. They're getting a lot of awards around some of their products. They're on top of this AI. They announced the AI agent stuff. They're really doing some good stuff. I think one of the big pivotal moments for WebEx specifically in the last few years has been its alignment with Microsoft Teams. Used to be the two hated each other, couldn't stand each other, and the Enterprise Connect keynotes called each other out. And there was just a lot of tension between these two companies. Choose your camp, choose them wisely. And a few years ago, Microsoft and Teams aligned around the meeting room, and That's pretty significant because Cisco's got a very big portfolio around meeting rooms, and all of a sudden, Microsoft had built their meeting room ecosystem to be, like all these different vendors to fill all the holes of different size rooms, different parts of the world, and then all of a sudden you bring Cisco in, and it's just like, wow. I mean, now you have a global solution with every size room and all this. So it's put a lot of pressure on that MTR space. But I think that the two of them working together has been really very powerful. So yeah, I think Cisco is taking some bows. It was a few months ago, maybe 6 months ago actually, when the CCAS Magic Quadrant came out. Cisco was the only company in that to move right and up. They were the only dot that moved right and up. So they're really making a lot of progress at Cisco, and I think that deserved a little recognition.
Fair enough. Great. Well, look, maybe let's talk about something that's not on your February Insiders report, and that is Mitel. Recently this week, news broke that it's potentially looking at entering into Chapter 11 proceedings. This has been unconfirmed on the date of recording. But what's your take on this? We've witnessed a few companies go through this kind of process, Avaya being probably the latest one. What's your take on this, Dave?
Well, it is unconfirmed, and so this is strictly based on rumor and speculation. If it turns out to be true that Mitel does file a Chapter 11, I think my reaction is not terribly surprised. And the reason I would say that is nothing to do really with Mitel specifically, but it's been a tough transition for any of the PBX vendors in the past 20 years to deal with the cloud. None of the PBX vendors have successfully made it or transitioned their business models without an acquisition. And so the two standouts are Teams, which acquired Skype, and Cisco, which acquired BroadSoft. But most of the companies that did not do well, Mitel thought they did an acquisition. They thought they acquired ShoreTel, which had spent a fortune and built itself on its cloud future. And it turned out that it really hadn't done a very good job building that out as much as we thought it had. So a few years back, Mitel decided, okay, forget it, forget the cloud. We're just going to partner with RingCentral, and we're going to stay in the PBX business. That partnership didn't work well, and it was it didn't make sense for Mitel. Maybe it made sense at the time. Today, in 2025, as we already mentioned, we're moving toward this hybrid cloud. So it used to be, prem or cloud, and it was one or the other, and the cloud was the future and prem was the past. Today, that zero-sum game is over, right? And so you can still do that. That is still an option, and that's fine. But it's no longer a zero-sum situation. And so we saw Mitel and Avaya announce partnerships with Zoom. And, that kind of partnership was always possible, but 10 years ago, the mindset just wasn't there. It's one or the other. That's the way we think. That now those partnerships say, well, maybe you do want voice from one vendor, and maybe you do want voice on-prem, and maybe you want something else in the cloud or from a different vendor. So that hybrid cloud, I think, is really getting a lot of momentum now. It's not just from those vendors. I think there's a lot of benefit to it. Most of the contact center space, in terms of number of agents, are still on-prem or private cloud. And there's various reasons why organizations are sticking with this older technology. But I just said it, the older technology, it's not necessarily older. At the time, earlier, it was legacy versus new. Now it's really, the legacy is kind of catching up. They've changed their billing models. They've changed their technology. They're adding AI overlays. And so there's a lot of benefits to both approaches. I've been talking a lot about how the UCAS is a stupid concept. And what that's about is that UCAS is a bundle of three services. It's telephony, team chat, and meetings. And we treat it like a zero-sum game. You pick your UCAS provider and you go all in. In reality, that's kind of not very common. I think Microsoft announced they have 20 million voice users on Teams, but they've got like 350 million, something like that, Teams users on meetings and team chat. So, and what are those other users doing? They're either getting voice completely separate, or they're getting voice from a Microsoft partner, like a RingCentral or an 8x8, and bringing it in. But it's still went separate. They didn't go with the full bundle. They went with separate pieces. So I think we're seeing every Slack customer, because Slack doesn't do dial tone. Every Slack customer has unbundled. So there's a large number of customers that are picking best of breed to solve these three modalities.
Does best of breed work?
So that's the whole.
Does best of breed work, Dave? In an AI world, does best of breed really work? Do you need that kind of all-encompassing kind of ecosystem to really get the most out of AI, or is that a bit of a misnomer now?
Well, that's the new gamble, right? Because the old gamble was if you buy the suite, you're better off, and that has not played out reliably. It certainly plays out from a let's have less vendors, a simplified integration, all that stuff. But a lot of customers are picking their modalities based on specialized needs, or based on that already had an investment there, or that's a good example of Slack. We already have tons of knowledge in our Slack data. We're not going to switch that for some other benefit. So the new gamble is, okay, well, if we can't get them on the suite play, what can we get them on? So maybe the AI play makes a lot of sense there. Mm-hmm. So you see Zoom, Microsoft, Cisco really doubling down on their AI story, trying to build and RingCentral too, building out a really strong AI component to their suite. But you can also get AI from best of breed. And there's lots of companies that are just going out and buying Perplexity or other types of services. You've got Google Gemini out there. So, there's always going to be this bundle or unbundle debate, best of breed versus family suite. But I think that the assumption is really the dangerous part. The UCaaS assumption is what really bothers me. For example, I mentioned Magic Quadrant earlier. Gartner used to make a Magic Quadrant for meetings. They used to make a Magic Quadrant for team chat. They don't. They only make one Magic Quadrant for UCaaS. But the problem is, not everyone's buying it that way. And so we have this assumption that everyone's going to go with UCaaS now. But it's very common to buy these suites, these applications separately.
Fantastic.
Oh, yeah, okay. So I think we covered all that. Okay.
Dave, I think that's a really good place to kind of wrap up. Obviously, the Mitel news, if confirmed, I'm assuming that will be a big part of your next report. Dave, if people want to find out...
We got Mobile World Congress. We just, a lot of stuff came out of there. We got we'll have Enterprise Connect in there. We got a lot of stuff going on in March, and so it's going to be another one. Now, the Insight Report always covers the month, and so the February ones that we were talking about here. But the quarterly, we also have that whole financial section. We didn't get into that, and so Dimitri does a quarterly report from Benchmark, and I'm sure he'll have a lot to say about Mitel as well.
Fantastic. So where can people go to find out a little bit more about your Insider Report, Dave?
TalkingPoints.com. The Insider Report is a paid subscription service, and then there's also the Insider Lite, which is a Substack free newsletter.
Fantastic. Mr. Dave Michels, thank you so much for joining me and sharing some of your insights. I look forward to our next conversation, and see you next time.
Thank you, Dave.